Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's show. It's an interactive broadcast tonight where we'll be talking to John Radley, who's a veteran and victim of the IRA, John Yates, who's a Northern Ireland unionist activist, and Ben Harris-Quinney, who's the chair of the Bow Group. So as I said, today's a very special episode where we're going to be discussing quite a sensitive topic to try and bring awareness around the issue of the IRA and actually the recent support of the IRA from extremist factions both in Northern Ireland and actually overseas in America and also amongst the youth of Britain. So we'll be touching on that throughout this. But without further ado, I'm going to bring in first John Radley.
Good evening, guys. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's nice to be here. And thanks very much, Jack, for inviting me.
Of course, thank you for coming on. I'll bring in John Yates now shortly. John, thank you for coming on tonight.
Yeah, Jack, thanks very much for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to this evening. I'm speaking to John Radley and speaking to yourself and letting the listeners hear what it is that John Radley has had to go through ever since the day when the IRA blew John Radley. They set a bomb outside Chelsea Barracks. It was known as the Chelsea Barracks bombing, and that day changed John Radley's life forever. And I'm here with John, with yourself here to explain to people the implications of that day. Thank you.
And last but not least, Ben Harris-Quinney, chair of the Bow Group. Hi, Ben, how are you this evening?
I'm good.
Thank you for joining us. So, John, I think if we start first, could you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your story?
Yes, certainly. As you can tell by my dulcet tones, I'm originally from Merseyside. Joined the Irish Guards in late 1979. Went to the battalion, was undertaking public duties. For people that aren't aware, the Brigade of Guards are made up of 7 different regiments, 2 cavalry regiments and 5 foot guards regiments. That includes the Grenadier Guards, Coldstream Guards, Irish Guards, Welsh Guards, Scots Guards. On the 10th of October 1981, we were coming away from our very last guard before we went and were deployed to Germany for a number of years. There was talk of the Irish Guards serving in Northern Ireland, doing tours of Northern Ireland, something that the Irish Guards, being an Irish regiment, had never done previously. There were overtones from the IRA that should that happen, they would take action, terrorist action against the Irish Guards. So on the 10th of October, we dismounted the Tower of London Guard. The Tower of London being quite a long way from Chelsea Barracks, obviously it's impossible to march back, so we get transport. As would happen on that day, it was raining, so the guys from Buckingham Palace and St James's Palace, they had to get transport back as well. With it raining, the rain would obviously ruin the bearskins and the clothes, the equipment. As we came into Chelsea down the Newbury Bridge Road, the traffic lights changed into our favour, so our coach was able to lead on, and the Buckingham Palace detachment coach was stopped at the lights on Newbury Bridge Road. As we passed the laundry van, which was parked on the left-hand side, the IRA had packed it full of nails and bolts and Semtex, which was the explosive of the day. Some of the nails, somebody had taken a lot of time to bend in half, so they were like boomerang shaped. So when the explosion went off, the nails would sprint through the air. That was in order to cause as much death and carnage and injuries as possible. As we passed, the IRA set the bomb off by remote control via a command wire. 2 people were killed. A lady called Nora, who again originated, funny enough, from Ireland, and a young lad who was 18, who was sitting by the coach, and basically when the bomb went off, he lost his face. And again, he descended from Ireland as well. Myself, I was the most seriously injured soldier on the coach. For example, I'll just run through the injuries. You see the scar going across my head here. I had a 6-inch nail embedded in my head. A big chunk of glass went through me. My right eye got lodged in my eye. My left eardrum was completely obliterated. St Thomas's Hospital built up a new eardrum for me from membrane from inside my head. The left side of my face, all these scars here, was smashed to pieces. My jawbone was smashed to smithereens. I had a 6-inch nail went through my neck, travelled through my body and got stuck in my back. But luckily enough for me, fortunate for me, it didn't touch any of my vital organs, so that didn't kill me. My left hand was up against the left side of my face, and that took a lot of the impact from the blast. And I've got metal in my 3 fingers. On top of the physical injuries that obviously everyone can see, and I see every single day when I get a shave in the mornings, is the mental injuries, the scars you can't see, the post-traumatic stress that I suffer with from time to time. I'm not going to hide away from the fact that I do have dark days. It's like a cloud hanging over your head, and no matter what you do, you can't shift it. But you put on a silly smile for your family. So what you're doing really is you're misleading yourself and you're misleading your loved ones. But again, being a soldier, you know, we are encouraged to get on with things, get on with life, and over the course of days and sometimes weeks, gradually you start feeling a little bit better, and the cloud lifts, but you don't know when it's going to come back again. So it's been really difficult. Then on top of all this, because of my injuries, being then medically discharged from the army some 8 years after I was injured, nobody wants to employ you. So you can't get a job anywhere. And to be honest with you, because of what you've been through, you don't really want to work for somebody else. So a lot of people who are injured, even going back to the Falklands, going on to Iraq, Kosovo, Bosnia, Afghanistan, a lot of soldiers, a lot of service personnel need to start their own businesses. So it's been traumatic, and without being over dramatic, I can honestly say that the IRA and the people that blew us up have really ruined my life completely and utterly. I have got things to be thankful for, obviously, and I take the blessings every day. I'm still here, I'm still alive, so every day I wake up is a blessing to me. I've got children and I've got grandchildren, so I've been given and afforded that opportunity. So if you believe in God, then I've been afforded that opportunity by probably a greater power than I would know. But certainly the injuries are ongoing. It's a lifetime of hospital. It's a lifetime of hospital treatment, and it's been a real tough time for me. So every day, like I say, is a blessing. I wake up every morning, I thank God. I go to the gym, I do a lot of training, because as it was put to me, I lift weights to lift the weight. So in a nutshell, that's me at the moment.
Wow, thank you very much for sharing. It's a very emotional story and very brave of you actually to come and talk to our audience and really bear your story out to them. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for doing that, because it just shows you get these. It really frustrates me. I've seen even in the comments, we've had a couple of pro IRA comments while you were even talking, which is ridiculous, and people just don't understand the ramifications of the actions of terrorists. This was not a war. It wasn't one nation versus another nation. It was terrorists killing and maiming innocent people for no real reason or cause. It was just mindless violence. There was no aim to negotiate. They were people who employed the worst tactics to achieve their twisted aims. And I say to all those people, the trolls out there who support the IRA, even the people of Ireland, even those who want a united Ireland, the vast majority do not support the tactics of the IRA because of what they did to people like John and what they could do and create more people like John in the future. It's absolutely horrific what they've done. But John, I'll pass around to you. What are your thoughts on what John Radley said?
Yeah, Jack, I'd just like to explain to the listeners that, I became involved with a group in Southeast Fermanagh. They're called the Southeast Fermanagh Foundation, and what they do is they represent victims in many more ways than one. And we had in 1998, we had what was floated as a peace deal in Northern Ireland, and it was known to some as the Belfast Agreement, and to others as the Good Friday Agreement. And the Good Friday Agreement, I mean, what it was meant to deliver, normality to Northern Ireland, a sort of peaceful situation for all of the people. And in working with SAFE over the last number of months, which is the victims group, I mean, what I hear time and time again is, let me just explain, is that we do this on a channel called Forgotten Voices Media, and we tell the stories of the forgotten voices, just like John Radley here. And, you know, John Radley was involved in the Chelsea, what was known as the Chelsea barracks bomb. And, you know, here we are in 2021. And this is just typical of what is happening right across the board to victims. And, you know, the man that made John Radley a victim, the man that actually planted the bomb, commissioned the bomb, and went to jail for putting that bomb in place. Now, let's just remember, it was a bomb which had nails in it, it had bolts in it, and these people detonated that bomb from a nearby scaffold, and they could quite clearly see who was around the vicinity whenever they were planting that bomb. And who was around the vicinity? Well, there was an old age pensioner. There were several children that was actually caught up in that bomb. And these people, they didn't care that the children was there. And we see this all so many times. They detonated the bomb as John's bus passed, and that bomb with nails and bolts, they went everywhere. And from my recollection, John, you'll be able to clarify this, but I think that one of the nails go through the old lady's heart.
Straight through her. Yeah, straight through her. And to be fair, and all she was doing, John, all this lady was doing was that she was a mother, a grandmother, and all she was doing was going about a normal daily business. She was coming out of the fruit and veg shop with potatoes to cook the Sunday dinner the next day for her family, and she never got to do that because these cowards, and that's all they are. And you've got to call people out for what they are, you know. And you can use emotive words, but it's an emotive subject. So these people, the scum of the earth that do this to a little old grandmother that's coming out of a fruit and veg shop to do the Sunday dinner, never got the chance to do that. Yeah. So it's not just me that's a victim. It's not just Nora's that's a victim. It's all her family. It's her children. It's her grandchildren. It's me. It's my wife. Now my children and grandchildren weren't born at the time, but they do know this now. They know what's happened to me, and unfortunately, because of the trolls out there, these people have no idea about what people have gone through. They've got no idea. So they're uneducated people because Sinn Féin and the IRA are trying to rewrite history. So if you want to be educated, then look into what's happened to people like me, and then make your judgment call.
Yeah, and Jack, I'll just in a few short words before we move on to Ben, I would just like to further add is that I mean there was a man that was killed in that bus bomb, and he was a young Irish lad. I mean they killed one of their own in it, and again bombs don't discriminate between Protestant, Catholic, or what side of the equation that some people are on, and we hear that also time and time again. Now, as we develop the screen, we'll move over to Ben there, but as we develop on this, we'll not spit everything out right now, but there's a reason why that John feels particularly aggrieved right now, and we'll get into that as we go round. So there you go, Jack.
Perfect. And handing over to you, Ben, what's your thoughts hearing all of this?
Well, you know, these have been extremely moving statements, particularly, if I may say, by John Radley. And you know, the Bow Group, the organisation that I run, our president is Norman Tebbit, Lord Tebbit. And many of you will be familiar with the Brighton bombing, which was an attack by the IRA on the Conservative Party Conference Hotel. Which was designed to kill the Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and wipe out the entire cabinet. There can be no doubt about that. The result of that bomb, thankfully, did not go to that extent, but it very severely wounded Lord Tebbit's wife. She never recovered from those injuries, and he withdrew from government to care for her. She passed away, sadly, a few months ago after a lifetime of being very profoundly affected by the results of that terrorist attack. The IRA targeted the monarchy, but I think the most important thing, actually, and it was touched on by the statements earlier, is that they targeted members of the general public who had not signed up to military action, who were not in government, who were as John said, going about their daily business as total innocents. We don't know what they felt about the situation in Ireland. What we do know is that they were killed and injured by the IRA. And my position is fairly controversial, I think, in that I see the Good Friday Agreement as a complete failure, because what the Good Friday Agreement said essentially was that terrorism was justified and terrorists won, because the result of those terrorist actions led to appeasement by the UK government. And the official policy of the UK government over many decades is that we do not negotiate with terrorists and we do not acquiesce to their demands. And that is really what the Good Friday Agreement did. And look, I'm a passionate believer in the union, but I'm also a passionate believer in democracy and self-determination. But we can see throughout the world that the way to achieve that is not via terrorism. It is via democratic means. And there are a great many examples within the union itself where legitimate political debate and democratic dialogue has led to enfranchisement by the people of the respective nations of the union. And that is the way to do it. The way not to do it is terrorism, is the brutal murder and maiming of not only British citizens generally, but also Irish citizens, because you're placing a whole country in the firing line when you take these actions. And let's also be clear that these are the actions of a minority, a significant minority perhaps, and a minority that has caused a lot of problems. But these people claim to speak for the Irish people. They claim to speak, in many cases, for the people of Northern Ireland. They do not speak for the people of Ireland and Northern Ireland, who by and large do not support brutality, terrorism and murder. And their actions have had very detrimental consequences for all nations of the union, I would say, and all peoples of the union. And so I think we have to, in light of what has happened with the Good Friday Agreement, we have to remind people the atrocities that were committed. And John has done so extremely powerfully, and how this has continued to affect lives in devastating ways. People have paid, in a great many cases, the ultimate price. And I don't think, frankly, that the British government has done enough to recognise and remember that. And I think they need to be stronger, actually, in condemning the actions of the IRA, regardless of how controversial that may be, because it is the right thing to do.
100%. Is there anything either Johns would like to add before we move on?
Well, I would like to say, look, the IRA, like you quite rightly said, they don't discriminate. If you think that the IRA technically, purportedly, are Catholics, the IRA are Catholic from the Catholic fraternity, but they've murdered over 2,000 of their own people, 2,000 of their own countrymen. And like I said to John on Forgotten Voices, these are Irish people that look at the same skies above Northern Ireland. They breathe the same air. They're of the same religion. I'm a Roman Catholic, so they don't discriminate. And it's affected so many people. Now today, I don't know if you're aware, but the 19th of March is the anniversary of the two corporals being dragged from the cars at the funeral, beaten, stripped, and then executed. They weren't murdered, they were executed. And today is that anniversary. And the sad indictment about this is that it seems to me that every single day is some anniversary of some atrocity perpetuated by the IRA. And I totally agree with you, Bob. I think The British government, successive governments, all we've done is appease. And we can't do that. The guys that murdered those two corporals, executed those two corporals, served, as far as I'm aware, 3 years because of the Good Friday Agreement. The guy that blew me up and those guys, Paul Kavanagh, a convicted murderer, a bomber, a child killer, served 5 years of 3 life sentences. How can that possibly be right?
I think we're probably all in agreement there. I think it's ridiculous, the hounding of the veterans compared to the lax punishment of the IRA. And as far as I'm aware, British veterans never put a bomb in a civilian building. They never executed civilians in maybe hundreds of years ago, but certainly not in recent memory. It's completely ridiculous that we've caved in to sort of terrorist demands. And again, there's one thing pushing for peace and getting justice for everyone, and there's another one just sort of caving in to try and end the conflict without really any consideration for people such as yourself, people, the other victims, and really the people of Northern Ireland. Because as far as I'm aware, the Good Friday Agreement, it's not ended the situation. It's almost like putting duct tape over a leak. It's not fixed it. It's still boiling and brewing. The fact we can't build a border with Southern Ireland, it shows the extent of how the Good Friday Agreement hasn't really worked to cool tensions. It's only really covered them up.
No, you're totally right as well, Jack, because what you just touched on another subject now, which is at the heart of a lot of veterans from Banner, which was obviously Northern Ireland. How, again, I just ask myself questions all the time. How can it be right that guys that were there 30, 40 years ago doing legitimate, lawful peacekeeping are being prosecuted and taken through the Irish courts for things that like I say, happened 30, 40 years ago? There's no evidence of any wrongdoing, but because this person was there at the time, or a person was there at the time, they've done like what's called the scattergun effect. These are the only people that can possibly try and prosecute, so they do that. These people are now in their 70s, now in their 80s. If you've done wrong, it's only right that you should be prosecuted, and that should be the same for anyone the world over. But it's just a case of total imbalance and bias. So the IRA terrorist murderers get released after a couple of years, get patted on the back, and get positions in high governments on extremely high salaries. And other people who were there to keep the two factions apart and to peacekeep get prosecuted through the courts. And we see that, and the public see that, and they see the injustice and the unfairness of it all.
Yeah, indeed. And, I would, again, just like to expand on what John Radley is saying, is that, over the course of quite some time, we've been interviewing, in discussion with victims from all sides of the past, really. And one of the men that springs to mind whenever I sit here and I listen, and this is for the purpose of explaining to the people who would think that we're on here to attack the IRA or Irishness or anything to do with the Republic of Ireland. Well, that's not the case, because, we talked to a man probably 5 or 6 weeks ago, a man called David Kelly. And David Kelly's dad was the first legitimate Irish Army person to be murdered by the IRA. He was murdered a man called Paddy Kelly, and he was murdered alongside a young Garda Síochána. And you see, these people that murdered Patrick Kelly, David Kelly's dad, and the young guard, is that they escaped from the Maze prison. They shot a prison officer in the head whilst escaping from the Maze prison. They escaped across the Irish border into the Republic of Ireland. And what they did was that they then kidnapped a man called Don Tidy, who was an Irish businessman, a member of the Irish Society in the Irish Republic. So they kidnapped him and they held him for ransom for £5 million. So the guards and the Irish Army were tasked to go try to free that Irish citizen. And whilst they were looking for this man, they came across the group in Woods near Monaghan. And David Kelly's dad, Patrick, and also the young guard, they were first on the scene. And the IRA, they shot them to death also. So these people were free in Ireland, one Irish person at a time, and they didn't discriminate who they shot or who they murdered or who they maimed. So to the people that's on the screen that is saying that this was some sort of war for freedom, well, there's the facts. That is the facts. And you know, we could show you facts after facts after facts, which actually show that quite clearly. And, you know, even when Ben here had been speaking about, you know, Lord Tebbit and his wife, and, you know, I mean, they didn't discriminate about who was in that hotel whenever they planted that bomb and killed and murdered and maimed people. And, you know, one of the things that really, and this is what we're on here for, and whenever I speak to John Radley, I see a man who is constantly being re-traumatized by these people. Now, this is the sick part of this here, is these people, they continue to add insult to the injury of the victims that they've already made. And, you know, and John, I would just again like to move to Ben, because, you know, we need to keep this flowing, and we'll come around and then you can tell people all about Paul Kavanagh and how that recently, and just a few years ago also, that you were continuously being, well, you were re-traumatized and now you're re-traumatized again. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you, John. I just want to come back on something that you said, Jack, actually, about peace being a noble aim. It indeed is, but peace is negotiated with nation states, not with terrorist groups. And what the Good Friday Agreement did was it gave the legitimacy of the IRA to the degree of a foreign government, or to the degree of what the IRA calls itself, the Irish Republican Army. But of course, the IRA is not an army. It is a brigand of terrorists, and it is that brigand of terrorists, despite what you know how it is coated with Sinn Féin and Martin McGuinness and legitimate, or so-called legitimate politicians. I think everyone knows what was going on, and that is that the British government was negotiating with terrorists, and they were negotiating to appease terrorists. And going back to what John Radley was saying about Catholicism, well, half of my family is Catholic. There is nothing in Catholicism. I have great reverence for the Catholic faith, and I've studied the Catholic faith over many years. There's nothing in Catholicism that underwrites or justifies this kind of barbarism and murder. And murder is the right word. Not only is it not part of Catholic teaching, it is fundamentally opposed to Catholic teaching. So again, you know, we've got to scrutinize these claims. These people are calling themselves a nation state. They're calling themselves an army. They're calling themselves Catholics. They are none of these things. None of these things. And that really should have been the position, I think, that the British government took. And I think it should be the position the British government can take. And I return to the point also about self-determination. I'm a passionate believer in the Union, but also a passionate believer in democracy and self-determination. And we look at Ireland, and we look at Scotland, and we look at Wales and Northern Ireland, and we see great progress from the point of view of democracy and self-determination in all of those quarters. And we see the opportunity in all of those quarters, if a democratic decision is made, as it was made in Scotland, to depart from the Union, if that is the wishes of the people of those constituent nations. And I think, again, whilst I would advocate for the Union, I think that is right. And so when you look at the Irish example and the Northern Irish example in the context of the IRA, why did they need to do it? Because they're not any further ahead than the nations of Scotland and the nation of Wales. So this was clearly an act of barbarism. I have no doubt that the opportunity would have been given to Northern Ireland to have a referendum on Union membership if it so wished, and if that was the democratic will. Therefore, the actions of the IRA were completely unnecessary. And to play devil's advocate for a second, and you know, there were brutal acts committed against Irish people by the British historically. That's undoubtedly true. Again, the Catholic position would not be to reciprocate those acts, in ever worse and more brutal terms. But these acts are often used as justification for the IRA's actions, and indeed justification for the peace as well, because it was sort of the idea was put forward very strongly in the British press. We had the recent conversation about the Guardian and their links to the IRA historically, but the case was put across in even the British press that this was a tit for tat situation, that, you know, on the one hand the British government had committed atrocities, and on the other hand the IRA had committed atrocities, so let's call it all even and move forward to peace from there. But again, that assumes the legitimacy of the IRA as a state actor, and you know, we've heard the powerful accounts, not only in this conversation, but obviously widespread and endless powerful accounts of how this has affected innocent members of the public, much in the same way that Islamic terrorism does. And Islamic terrorism often ends up blowing up Muslims and blowing up people that are pro-Palestine, blowing up people of all views and values and creeds and backgrounds, because it is indiscriminatory by its very nature. And military action, even going long into the past, even going into the worst atrocities of military action, there is accountability that comes with it. There is a thought process that comes with it. And there is a plan and a strategy that comes with it that should always, and I think certainly in the modern era, does always attempt to achieve its aims with minimum or zero collateral damage and zero damage to civilian populations. The IRA strategy was the total opposite of that. It targeted civilian populations. It targeted people who could in no way be described as responsible, and may have even been supporters of Irish reunification. I think, in fact, we know that there are examples where individuals were supporters of Irish reunification and were affected very severely by terrorism. So, like with most of these debates, when you actually shine a bright light on them and cut through the spin of the Good Friday Agreement and the way that it is packaged politically as almost being sacred, you know, I was very involved in the Brexit debate, and when we had the Brexit debate, one of the main points raised was, well, you can't, you know, this might damage the Good Friday Agreement. We must protect the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement is sacred, and everyone agrees that it's brilliant. No, I don't think everyone does agree that it's brilliant, and I think actually now would be a good time, given that we've had almost several decades now since the Good Friday Agreement, that we could look at it again and look at some of the truths of what was going on and how the decisions were being made, and the realities of what the IRA was and what the IRA did. And I think when you do that, and you then look at the Good Friday Agreement, I think people are going to be far less enthusiastic about it, and that's a debate we haven't really had for a long time in Britain. So I'm grateful to you, Jack, and for Turning Point for having that debate here. But I think it needs to go more widely, and certainly peace must be the aim, and certainly peace is a noble cause, and I'm absolutely not advocating for a departure from peace in Ireland. As I say, I think you can look at the examples of Scotland and Wales and the devolved assemblies and see how there is no need for anything other than peaceful dialogue and democratic dialogue. But I also think that it is right that we pursue the truth, and the truth about the IRA and the Good Friday Agreement, I don't think has been fully told.
No, I think I'm in complete agreement with you there, and certainly what we try and do at Turning Point is we try and show awareness of issues which might have been swept under the rug or people aren't fully knowledgeable about. So for everyone watching, as I said at the start, this is really just to try and counter the narrative that's currently being put out by apps such as TikTok. You see it a little bit on Instagram, and even actually in the comments on this video of people usually they're kids, they're 12, 13, 14. They don't actually fully understand the situation and what they're supporting. They think it's just a fun trend they're backing. But we do events like this to show you actually the ramifications of your words and who you're supporting and who you're enabling. But I'll pass over to you, John, because I believe you had a story you wanted to tell us, or an account you wanted to tell us. John Radley, sorry.
Yeah, okay. I was going to say the disproportionate and the re-traumatizing of victims by the perpetrators happens all the time, and is all too often. For me, I don't personally seek press or publicity. It's not something that I do. I've got my little business. I'm trying to forge a life and move ahead, and provide my family with the financial security that obviously every father, every husband wants to do. Like I said before, one of the people that planted the bomb and blew us up is a guy by the name of Paul Kavanagh. Now, after I was injured, I was on the road to recovery, rehabilitation, hospital treatments, hospital appointments, operation after operation after operation. And then what we find is that Paul Kavanagh is released from prison under the Good Friday Agreement. And he's given the job as a special advisor to Mark McGuinness. That job carried a salary of £90,000 a year. Now, he's a murderer, a child killer, as I was saying before. I'm a guy putting the red tunic on, a big fairy hat, marching up and down outside Buckingham Palace. I'm serving my country. I am a member of the Irish Guards. I'd never been to Northern Ireland, I'd never been to Ireland. However, it was a matter of immense pride to me to wear the shamrock on my tunic and to represent the people of Ireland, North and South. So this guy, Paul Kavanagh, he gets £90,000 a year as a special advisor to Mark McGuinness. I end up getting medically discharged with no home, no house to go to, no job. And I'm given at the time I was discharged, a small disability pension. Now, that for me, I've lost everything. I've lost my way of life. I've lost my career. I've lost my security. Everything's gone. I've lost everything. Not only that, I'm stuck. I'm left with all these injuries that I've got to somehow try and process and cope with. So I don't understand how we can reward these people. We can reward these terrorists, because this £90,000 a year, don't forget, is paid for by the taxpayer. So every single hard-working man and woman that's paying tax is paying these terrorists wages. And then I'm left with a pension with no career. And I just couldn't understand for the life of me, and I still don't understand for the life of me, how that can be allowed to happen in anywhere in the world. How is that allowed to happen? Then obviously we move forward. We got Anne Travers, we got a few other people, we got Seth, we got Kenny Donaldson, Ken Fusion, and we manage with Jim Alistair and Samuel Morrison. We managed to get the special advisor, this guy. We managed to get Paul Kavanagh. We managed to get him sacked. But they're not happy with that. They're not happy with us removing him from the job. What they then do is they give this guy who was a child. Don't forget, he's a child killer. They've now given him a job as a special advisor on the schools panel. This guy is responsible now for making policy and procedure for school children in Northern Ireland. So now you've got the whole thing, the whole history of Northern Ireland, the whole history of the Troubles being rewritten by people who are terrorists. And I like to think I'm an intelligent person. And I sit here and I think, how can this be allowed to happen? How can people in power sit there and think that this is appropriate behaviour to have these people representing an education authority or being a special advisor to a politician? Rightly or wrongly, Martin McGuinness called away. But how can that be allowed to happen? Then you've got the flip side of the coin, and people like me and victims and civilian victims are just patted on the head and forgotten about. And the minute we do something like this, we are then deemed as problem people by the establishment. Everything for me, although I was in the Irish Guards, I was military police, Irish Guards. So I've got a real strong sense of purpose and justice. And for me, with the best will in the world, I can't see how what has happened to me and people like me, compared to what's happening to Paul Kavanagh and people like him, is justice. I just fail to understand it. And I wish, and I've asked, and John Shaw will tell you, sorry, John Yates will tell you, I've asked and asked and asked for people to explain it to me, to justify it to me, to give me some kind of understanding. And nobody can. And nobody can because it can't be justified.
What I'd ask you is what would you say about, you mentioned the politicians sort of paint you out to be the bad guy for speaking up against these terrorists. Why do you get these Labour politicians like Jeremy Corbyn, even Keir Starmer, who served under Jeremy Corbyn and McDonnell, sort of rampant IRA supporters and said nothing about it? Why do you get these people who praise the IRA despite hearing accounts from victims such as yourself and other victims? It's all public knowledge what evil people the IRA are. Why do they still support them?
I'd say for why, Jack, because nobody, Jeremy Corbyn, Keir Starmer, nobody has took the time to sit down with people like me. They've got their opinion, and everyone's entitled to opinion. I've got no problems with that whatsoever. You know, I've got opinions. Some of my opinions are wrong and misguided, and I'm fully prepared to accept that. So if somebody can say to me, look, John, what you think there is not right because A, B, and C, I'll accept that. And if they're right, I'm fully prepared to take that viewpoint on board. The problem with Jeremy Corbyn is that Jeremy Corbyn is not just a friend of the IRA. He seems to be a friend of all terrorist groups. He's consistent in that aspect of things. I done a thing for John's got it now. He's got the link. I done a thing with the Sun newspaper at the last election, and that was put on Facebook, and that had over 800,000 views. Now I'm not saying, and I'm not important enough to think that my viewpoint is right. I'm just saying that I think my viewpoint is reasonable, and I think it should be listened to. I think it deserves that respect because of what I've been through. And I'm not just speaking for myself, Jack. It's not just me. It's not just John Radley. It's not the Bible according to me. I'm speaking for every single veteran of Op Banner. I'm speaking for every single victim of the IRA. Not just the immediate victims, like I say, the ones that have been murdered and maimed and disfigured. I'm talking about all the victims, the collateral damage, like you were saying, of all the husbands, the wives, the brothers, the mothers. I'm speaking for everybody. Because if we don't do this, then these people from the IRA and Sinn Féin are going to walk all over us like they are doing now. Everybody needs to be held to account. And I think the time has come now for Jeremy Corbyn, Keir Starmer, all these politicians that think that getting involved with victims and survivors is kind of a taboo subject. Forget about that. It needs to be addressed. The Good Friday Agreement needs to be addressed. It needs to be radically looked at, and it needs to be radically overhauled.
Yes, definitely. I think you'll always have a place to voice your opinion at Turning Point. Same with you, any other survivors of the IRA, victims of terrorists, will always back your corner and stand up for you.
Thanks, Jack.
John.
Indeed, Jack. Just sitting listening to John there again, it brings back memories of so many people just like John. And, again, going back to the Belfast, the Good Friday Agreement, and it was meant to be a peace process. And it was signed in 1998. And, there was a lead up to the Belfast Agreement. There was a time between 1994 and 1998 whereby there was a thing called talks about talks, and where they were bringing the IRA had a ceasefire, and various other people that was involved in violence here in Northern Ireland. They also they decided that they weren't going to fight with each other anymore, and there were, we look forward to Northern Ireland, what could have been the best chance that we've ever had for a peaceful future for everyone. And what happened in 1996, 2 years on from the IRA saying that they were going into ceasefire and they were laying down their weapons, what they did was they planted a bomb, and you people will know this bomb very, very well. It was in the Docklands, and that was in February of 1996. And from my recollection, it caused £500 million worth of damage. Now, that was the point whereby that the peace process, which could have been, it become an appeasement process, because they were using the threat of the bomb in February of 1996 to extract concessions from the British government. And because the British government didn't want any more bombs in England, was the truth of the matter, they tried to appease these people. And then everybody's seen this thing as an appeasement process. So they were brought in from the cold again afterwards. And they went on, and we did have this Belfast Good Friday Agreement. But from that day in 1996, when the IRA recognised that they were negotiating with a government that were prepared to do almost anything in order to ensure that bombs and bullets didn't hit the streets in the UK again, and they were prepared to do anything. In 2016, just a few short years ago, 2016, just back a wee bit, the IRA murdered 2 people in Belfast, whilst their political party, the political party which was associated with them, are running our government. And I just try to comprehend that for one moment, that we imagine, we had a party that was in Westminster, and outside the door they had a private army that was threatening people, that was murdering people, that was continuing to murder people, that was continuing to add insult to the injury of the victims that they had already created. And whenever I say insult to injury, well, I'm just going to talk about John Radley there, who's in front of us. Is that when Martin McGuinness was alive, and when they were involved in the Stormont executive, what he did was he appointed Paul Kavanagh. Paul Kavanagh was the man that made John Radley a victim. Paul Kavanagh was a child murderer. Imagine putting, say, Ian Huntley in charge of the education board. And that's how serious this is. And, that was the man that made John Radley a victim. And Martin McGuinness appointed him as a special advisor. So the unionists involved in the assembly, a guy called Jim Allister, and they got together, and what they did was they raised concerns about this. This just isn't right. That this man, having had all these life sentences for killing so many people, killing so many children, well, really, is that the type of people that we want involved advising in our government? So there was a law brought forward, and what happened was that he was then disqualified from holding that position. Now, this machine, this Republican machine, they don't stop. What they then did was that, a few years later, they get an opportunity to put this man, Paul Kavanagh, on the education board in a high-ranking role within the education board, which, again, now put yourself in John Radley's shoes and think, this is the man that could have killed him. And John Radley was very nearly killed, and people were killed on that day. And, and this same man, if you do the history, what you'll find is that he planted a bomb in Harrods, killing people. And he got so many life sentences. And I'm just imagine for one moment, the importance of this, putting this man into the education board, making decisions on children's future. Now, you tell me that is right. You tell me that wouldn't traumatize and re-traumatize and add insult to the injury that John Radley already has. And if you tell me that, no matter where you're on that live chat or no matter where you are, I will say that you've taken leave of your senses. Over to you, Ben. Ben, mute.
Sorry, Ben, I'll just unmute you.
Thanks. I also want to go back to what John Radley was saying, and I think that actually there's a more important issue than even the Irish question here, because I've been involved in a military charity for the last 5 or 6 years, and from the perspective, and through the Bow Group as well, I've spoken to a very, very large number of veterans, not just veterans that have served in Ireland, not just veterans that have served in the UK, but those that have served in Afghanistan, Iraq, the Falklands, many theatres throughout the world. And a very sizable proportion of them do not feel that the British government have given them the support and the credit they deserve. And let's remember that the first and most sacred priority of government is to protect the citizens. And the first tool that a government has in protecting the citizens is the armed forces. And therefore, the bond that exists between the government and the armed forces must be absolutely sacred. And in a lot of cases, and I very much saw this with Iraq war veterans, but it is by no means unique to that conflict, that many members of the armed forces or veterans do not necessarily agree with what they are being sent to do. They don't agree with the politics behind it, but they do agree with the principle that they have signed up to follow orders, and they have therefore entrusted the government of the United Kingdom to give them the right orders, to give them honourable orders, and to take care of them when they carry out those orders, and also for any consequences that come thereafter. And I think it is an absolute disgrace the way that the government has treated veterans, particularly over the last 3 or 4 decades. I don't think that they have the support that they deserve. And you can cite examples of what the IRA have done with Kavanagh. And, of course, I agree that a child murderer should not have any place in politics, any place anywhere, really, other than prison. But you've also got to look at the other side of it, which is how John has been treated and how he feels he's been supported or not supported by the UK government. And, I would implore John and other veterans to remember that the UK government is not the British people. And what John said about the article that he contributed to, and the very wide number of people that read that and supported that, I think speaks to a wider truth that the British public are hugely grateful to the service of veterans, even in conflicts like Iraq, where they don't agree with, because they understand that these people are putting their lives on the line for all of them, for all of us. And yes, governments make mistakes, and yes, governments make the wrong decisions, but people that sign up for the military are doing so to protect the British citizenry first and foremost. And the British public honour that, the British public respect that, and the British public love veterans for what they've done and want to see them given that support. And I think that the Good Friday Agreement speaks to that lack of support, but it goes far beyond the events that have occurred in Ireland. And one of the things that the Bow Group particularly pushed on with the various reviews that have gone into the military covenant over the last 10 to 15 years is that not only must there be a commitment to only committing our armed forces to conflict where British interests are at stake, and I think that's been a question with a number of the conflicts over the last 20 years, but also that the support is not only there, but it is felt by veterans that if you put your life on the line for this, the UK government will support you for the rest of your life because of the sacrifice you have made. I don't see that in our policy, and I don't see that in speaking to veterans, and it's frankly heartbreaking to hear the accounts of John Radley, who clearly feels that he has taken an honourable course of action. And of course you can debate his career and his record. I'm sure he would stand by it. And then you've got the career and the record of a terrorist, and the terrorist has gone on to earn £90,000 a year and have an influence on policy, and John's been left to deal with the aftermath and the horrific results and costs to his life and his family. because of his commitment to the British people, really. And you can say, well, anecdotes aren't applicable to policy, but this is not a unique story. This is a story that I think you can hear from a great number of veterans. And I think that, as well as the IRA, I don't want to go off too much in a tangent, but it is very fundamental to this, because I think a lot of veterans felt the Good Friday Agreement was a failure by the UK government in terms of its commitment to veterans, and I think it goes far more widely than that. So that's something that I will continue to encourage the UK government to do more on.
100%. John, would you like to come back to Ben at all?
Well, what you're saying, Ben, to be honest with you, it's the British soldiers or people from the armed forces per se. We don't want, and we're not looking for praise, plaudits, thanks. It's not what we do. But like I say, if something's not right, you have to call it out for what it is, and it goes from the sublime to the ridiculous. Whereas you've got the likes of Paul Kavanagh and the IRA being rewarded for what they do, and the other side of the coin, we're not. I don't know if you've seen recently, but there's now talk of active IRA members, past members, being awarded with basically a campaign medal. A campaign medal for the IRA against the conflict in Northern Ireland, the troubles in Northern Ireland. My reward, my recognition, I can tell you now, and you can check my military career, my record. Personally speaking, and I can speak to all the other guys that were injured on that coach on that day as well. None of us got any recognition. None of us got any thanks, any praise. Not that, like I say, we're not seeking it, but again, it's this imbalance where terrorists can get awarded a medal, and the people on the receiving end don't get anything. Like I said, just beggars belief. And when we see things like that, and when we see that the British government are not saying, well, hang on a minute, that is beyond the pale, they're not saying anything. And we're just thinking, well, how can that be right? Just a simple thing. It's simple, and it's about, like John was saying, it's about the re-traumatizing of victims. It's like the IRA, for some reason, Sinn Féin, want to rub these things in our faces all the time. So there comes a point where you've got to say, look, enough's enough. That is it now. You've crossed the line, because there is a line in anything, in any walk of life. There is a line, and you don't cross it. It's being crossed now. The Good Friday Agreement, they crossed the line then. The Queen, our Commander-in-Chief, right? We would lay down our life for our monarchy, and I would still do that today. If I seen somebody firing a weapon, I wouldn't run away from that person. I would go towards that person to draw the fire away from civilians, because that's what we do. That's what we're trained. It's a vocation. That's what we do. But you've got to turn around and say, look, enough is enough. Enough is enough now. We need to have some kind of recognition. We need to have some kind of checks and procedures in place where people from the IRA, active members of the IRA, terrorists and murderers, don't get placed in positions of reward, of power, and of privilege.
Well, I think the thing that baffles me as well is, had they been right-wing extremists, and again, quite rightly so with this, but had they had say, an English Defence League history or a Britain First history, they would be barred from a lot of these positions. And I don't understand why the IRA, again, English Defence League, very terrible organisations, but how the IRA, who actually have killed people, have been given this stuff. Especially, again, the equivalent would be for people watching, certainly my generation, certainly a lot of other people, it seems, I find it quite hard to relate to the IRA. Again, I was born in '98 myself, and we may have people watching who are born after me. But it's the equivalent of giving a medal to the terrorists who blew up the Manchester Arena, the Ariana Grande. Because the equivalent of giving the medal to the man who had the London Bridge attacks, who drove a van into people. It's completely ridiculous to honour these people who have traumatised British people, and then while banning other groups, but then refusing to ban the IRA from receiving rewards because they fear them. They fear terrorism. And I just don't understand why we are pandering to terrorists. Again, it's the equivalent. Imagine if ISIS rocked up tomorrow and said, if you don't ban gay marriage, we're going to bomb Parliament. And then the UK government caving in because they don't want Parliament to be bombed. It sets such a dangerous precedent in this country. We need a blanket rule of we do not negotiate and we do not honour terrorists under any instance.
I think, Jack, you're totally right. And again, we go back to the Good Friday Agreement and the appeasement. And like I was saying about the Queen, like I was saying about the Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron, going across the storm once and apologising to Mark McGuinness and Gerry Adams for the British part in the Troubles. Well, again, I will speak for myself, but I know I'm speaking for every single veteran and every single member of the armed forces. You don't apologise in our name. We are not there. We don't make a conscious decision to say, right, we're off to Northern Ireland and we're going to do this keep peace and task, or we're going to go to Afghanistan, or we're going to go and look for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We don't do that. The government of the day sends us. So I'm not, to be quite fair, to be quite honest, I'm not there for the government of the day. If we're there together and we are in the same section, I'm there for you guys. I'm there to look after you and to watch your back and to make sure nothing happens to you. And you're there for me. We do that. And that's where the team comes in. That's teamwork. So the government can, and I will, if I got the phone call today and said, John, we need you in such and such a location tomorrow, do you know what? I would go. Even what's happened to me, I would go, because my overriding sense of duty goes beyond anything.
What more do you say whenever you listen to John there? And, I would like to address the people that is watching now, the people that will come along to watch again in the future, is that, whenever there was the prospect of peace back in 1994, I think that if people had took that golden opportunity, be they terrorists or be they not, I think that if they had worked to really quell the bitterness and hatred from the past, I believe that we would have been sitting today, possibly as a prosperous place in Northern Ireland, a place where everyone gets on. But what these terrorists do is they continue to agitate against people, and in a way that it makes it impossible for reconciliation in the future. And therein lies the danger for placating these people, for appeasing these people. A saying that came from a unionist, a well-known unionist politician in Northern Ireland, was said that you can't feed crocodiles, because what crocodiles do is they keep coming back for more and more and more. And, Jack and Ben and John, you all live in England. I know that there's huge problems with politics, not just in Northern Ireland, but right around the Western world, be that England, Scotland and Wales or wherever. And, it's really down to those that just like John said, those people that they cherish their history, their heritage, their country, and all that goes with it, and they cherish their nationality. And as John would say, there is that he would lay down his life for the sake of his friends, and that's just the way that I guess patriotism works. And these people on the other side, they want to destroy all of that. They want to destroy the United Kingdom. They want to destroy Britishness. They want to destroy everything that we people have ever held so dear and ever believed in. So therein lies the problem, is that we're diametrically opposed. And these people, I guess, just like the Jeremy Corbyns of the not too distant past, that they're in the Parliament trying to destroy the Parliament and trying to disrupt the country. And this is exactly what we've got. We have now the arsonist in charge of the so-called fire brigade in the Northern Ireland Assembly, like we have in the Scottish Assembly and the Welsh Assembly and everywhere else. And, we can't give in to these people. And for the people on the live chat that thinks that we're here to bash Irish people, well, that's not the case, because how can you measure a victim like John, other victims, untold amounts of victims who continue to get this insult added to their injury by these people that won't get off the backs of not only our people, not only British people, not only Northern Ireland unionist people, they won't get off the backs of their own people also. as I explained when I told you that they don't differentiate in where their bullets and their bombs go, and there's lots and lots of stories just like that. So Jack, I would really like to thank you for inviting me on the screen, and and it's been a very, very interesting discussion to come here. And I hope, Jack, that maybe periodically that you can do more of these, because through victims group that we host various events with various victims, and even victims from the Catholic nationalist side of the fence. We can get to show people that terrorism is wrong, and it definitely needs to, how do I say it, that you need not let things fester, because if you let things fester, they just get worse.
100%. And passing over to you, Ben, do you have any closing comments or a final statement you'd like to make?
Yeah, I would summarize my position, and also in light of what's been said this evening, as being one that is about the pursuit of truth, ultimately, and is about the pursuit of justice. And it is not to deny the complexity of the situation. It is not to deny the views of those people in Ireland and outside Ireland that want a united Ireland, that want to that want Northern Ireland to leave the United Kingdom either. It is that's almost a different debate. The debate this evening is really about terrorism, and is about the actions of the IRA and what really went on. And I maintain that if you look at that record, if you look at the accounts of people like John Radley, if you look at the detail of the Good Friday Agreement, and if you look at the reality of how the UK government has treated its veterans, particularly over the last few decades, you get to actually a very different position. If you are someone who is simply objectively looking at the truth, you get to a very different position than the one that is most prominently put out there, that the Good Friday Agreement is a wonderful thing, and that many of these actions were justified, and that there was wrong on both sides. And I think the truth exposes the reality of what the IRA was. It exposes the reality of the weakness of the British government in dealing with the IRA. And it brings us to the necessity for this whole issue to be looked at again. I mean, it's been described in the Brexit debate as a terrible thing that we've got to look at the Irish question again, but maybe it isn't a terrible thing. Maybe it is an opportunity to, once decades have passed or years have passed, to look at the situation again and pursue the truth of it, and perhaps reassess in the minds of the British public, because ultimately, the government often forgets this, but ultimately it's the British public that matter. It's the British public that are in charge, and it is the views of the British public that the government are there to put forward. And so I think the time is right to look at this issue again, and not return to conflict and not return to war, to address this situation via democratic processes and debates, but a democratic process and debate that puts truth at the top of the list of priorities. And I think we're a mature enough country to do that and to deal with that, and to listen again to the accounts of people like John, and think again about where we all stand on that.
100%. And just before we wrap up, John, if you're happy to, I'd like you just to ask you, what would you say to someone who continues to sort of support the IRA? They might not know a lot about it, but as I said, we get a lot of this online at the moment, where people, it's particularly around the Black and Tan song, come out you Black and Tan, they do TikTok trends, they do dances, they promote this stuff without really knowing what they're looking into, or if they do know what they're into. Again, we've had a few comments where people have said the violence was justified because of British colonialism. What would you say to those people?
There's never is violence justified anywhere. Like we've been discussing tonight, we have Northern Ireland, we have Wales, we have Scotland, we have England. The English, the Welsh, the Scots haven't reverted to the bomb and the bullet, but some factions in Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland have. So there's no justification. People on TikTok, I think a lot of them, the vast majority of them, do it for effect, do it to get some kind of response. And we have to decipher who is genuine and who isn't. Unfortunately, the internet can be a real good place, but equally, we all know it can be a real bad place. And it attracts all the wrong people for all the wrong reasons. If somebody's got any questions about how it affects people, then speak to me. Ask me a question. I'm not going to lie to anyone. I'm not going to glamorize anything. I'll be honest with you. And I will say to these people who say violence is justified, imagine it was one of your family members. It was your father, it was your mother that had a nail straight through her heart. Are you going to tell me then that that's justified? I think not. I've also heard that, and again, this is a narrative from Sinn Féin, that we should forget it now. The past should stay in the past. It is, like we were saying, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago now. But for me, this is not the past. This is my presence. I live this every single day of my life. Not just me, but Dennis Hutchins, who's now, I think, is in his 80s now, trying to being taken through the courts in Northern Ireland. We live this every single day. So if you're on TikTok, if you've got any questions, then please feel free, contact me. I'll speak to you. I'm not going. I'm not just. I'm sure you know. I'm not the type of person who is abusive. I try to debate things properly, sensibly, and rationally. And if they've got and if they're saying that violence is justified, and women and children are being blown up and maimed, and saying blown up is a bit of a throwaway comment or statement. When you get blown up, your body is ripped apart. Let's have it right. That's what blown up means. You are blown to pieces. So if you've got Omar and Inniskillen, and you've got people that attend the cenotaph service, and they get ripped apart by bombs, justify that to me. I would ask them that question. You're saying violence is justified. How? How can you justify it? Explain to me, because I would like to know. Because, like I say, as intelligent as I like to think I am, for some reason, that plausible justification escapes me.
Thank you very much, John. Very powerful words there. But thank you everyone for coming on tonight. I think we've overrun slightly, but I think it was worth overrunning. So it's very, very valuable input from everyone here. So thank you again, John Radley, who's a veteran and victim of the IRA, John Yates, who's a Northern Irish pro-union activist and runs Forgotten Voices Media, and to Ben Harris-Quinney, who's the chair of the Bow Group. For all those watching, we will be looking to do events like these again in the future, partnering up with Forgotten Voices Media and hopefully a few other political organisations. So do keep your eyes peeled. We always advertise them on our social media. But thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you to the guests. And I hope you all really contemplate on what you've heard this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.